It's a movie we've all seen before. Ahead of a meeting with one of America's biggest foes, Donald Trump gets together with the people who are supposed to be our friends, goes on the attack, and then claims victory over both them and past American presidents.
For years, presidents have been coming to these meetings and talked about the expense, the tremendous expense for the United States, and tremendous progress has been made. Everyone's agreed to substantially up their commitment. They're going to up it at levels that they've never thought of before.
Except maybe they had thought of it before. Because Trump's claims about what everyone has agreed to sound a lot like a deal all the NATO members made back in 2014 when they said they'd each pay 2% of their gross domestic products by the year 2024. And at least according to the leaders of France and Italy, that timeline has not changed in the least. Even so, are claims like these a winning strategy here at home for Trump?
I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius.
Consistent indeed, having made that exact same stable genius claim on Twitter back in January. That was only January? At any rate, Trump and First Lady Melania are on to London, where the British subjects are preparing to greet them in style.
I think they like me a lot in the UK.
I think so, too. Joining me with their thoughts are Carol Saivetz. She's Senior Advisor at MIT's Security Studies Program. Good to see you, Carol.
Nice to see you, Joe.
And Gautam Mukunda, a Harvard Kennedy School Fellow, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and author of Indispensable, When Leaders Really Matter. Gautam, it's great to see you. So conventional wisdom is Trump treats our friends like enemies, our enemies like friends. But is it possible there's a method to his madness, particularly as relates to allies?
What I find really interesting about the summit that just concluded is that he's not the first president to ask our European allies to get up to that 2% threshold and everything else. And everybody was saying yesterday, why doesn't he just sort of be quiet? Why doesn't he sort of declare victory lap and say, yes, he's pushed them? And instead, he berated them publicly. It's not the way we treat our allies.
Well, I know you don't like it as a policy person. But is it possible there is a strategy? Is it possible there isn't any? He doesn't seem to be paying a price for it. Is he paying a price with our allies?
We don't know if he's paying a price, because I think the price will be the strength of the NATO alliance down the road. We don't know today or tomorrow what's going to go on. I'm more worried about Monday than I am actually about this meeting. Yeah.
Is it going to weaken that alliance, his relationships, the way he treats our buddies?
Oh, without a doubt. So
why?
Let's split out exactly what he's talking about when he says the NATO allies aren't contributing. NATO is not a country club where you pay dues. What he's talking about is the NATO allies are not spending enough on defense. And that is true. Every American president said they're not. Everybody agrees on that. But this is how incoherent Trump's position is. He tweeted out they need to spend more and the U.S. needs to spend much less. He said that on Twitter, right? Written statement. But, of course, Trump's own budget calls that the U.S. should spend much more on defense.
Military,
So he is simultaneously arguing that the United States must spend more and less on defense.
But, you know, it seems to me, I want to talk about the politics for a minute. You both are policy people. When I watch this, I try to be objective as I can and say, there's a certain appeal of this approach back home.
Absolutely.
The President of the United States goes overseas and he says, you're not going to treat my taxpayers unfairly.
Right.
You're going to contribute at the same level. There is a certain appeal to this at home,
Oh,
right? And by the way, I know prior presidents have done it, but never so frontally as he does it, right?
Well, I think that there's no question there's a domestic component to this strategy, if indeed it is a strategy, is that he gets applause. When he was in, wherever it was, Montana the other day, he got applause when he said, I'm going to go to NATO and I'm going to make sure that they pay up their fair share.
But that's an audience of all supporters. I mean, even of some people in the middle who may be tentative about this guy.
You know, it's a very complicated thing because, yes, the NATO allies should be paying more. Yes, there's a lot of concern about the Nord Stream pipeline, but it doesn't make the hyperbole is such that it doesn't make Germany completely dependent on Russia. I mean,
because I still don't understand how we suffer down the line. I understand, again, in academia, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all.
You have two academics here.
No, I really didn't. Maybe I did. I don't know. But in the real world, what are they going to do to the United States, even if they can't stand the guy and his tactics?
I'm only a half-time academic, but let me put it this way.
I'm full-time, but whatever.
Alliances depend on the different members of the alliance believing with absolute certainty that their ally will come to help them when we're needed, right? In the history of NATO, by the way, the only time the NATO alliance has ever been invoked was in our defense after 9/11. But The purpose of NATO was to get the European powers to believe that the United States would protect them if the Soviet Union tried to invade, or now Russia tries to influence Western Europe using its greater size and military power. As long as they believe that, they will both be tied very closely to the United States and therefore cooperate with us on everything else we do all over the world, and obviously that's very helpful. And they will also make sure that they don't sort of muscle up and repeat the cycle of European violence that led to the First and Second World Wars, and it's basically the only constant of European history up until the United States created NATO.
And you think those things are potentially at risk if it turns out...
If you were sitting in Riga or in Tallinn, would you worry about, I think you would worry about the United States and NATO coming to your aid if Russia starts to make trouble with the Russian speakers? I mean, where is the... I would worry, if I were living there.
We can put that even more simply, right? The Russians launched an attack on the United States in 2016, or Russian intelligence attacked the American government, the United States, and Trump refused to defend us, as continued to refuse to do anything to protect against it. So if he's not willing to defend the United States, why would they believe he's willing to defend them?
Okay, we're going to get to Russia in just a second, but there's one thing in between. As I mentioned, he's in the UK, and for a guy who likes a negotiating edge, at least it seems to me as a non-academic, Carol, that he's in great situation. You got Prime Minister May in deep you-know-what over this Brexit thing, and it seems to me that once she is able to shepherd something through, assuming she is, that the thing she's going to want most is a great trade deal with the United States of America, which gives huge leverage to Donald Trump, does it not?
I think on that level it does, but I think on the interpersonal level and the sense of him bashing all of our longstanding allies, the body language and all the public pictures from yesterday and today are such that no one wanted to stand next to him. She stood as far apart from him as
And Trump just praised Boris Johnson, by the way, who just resigned from his government.
But I know you keep waiting to get to Russia, but let me just say that we now know that a lot of the money behind the Leave campaign in Britain came from Russia. This guy, Aaron Banks, was promised all kinds of sweetheart deals in mining and minerals and stuff in Russia. So I think they've attacked Britain as well. And if Trump, as Gautam just said, isn't willing to say he's going to defend us, he's certainly not going to defend Theresa May and Britain against Russian attacks
you win.
as well.
I'm not going to wait anymore. Here's the President of the United States on Tuesday talking about the guy he's going to be meeting with on Monday. Here he is.
So I have NATO. I have the UK, which is in somewhat turmoil, and I have Putin. Frankly, Putin may be the easiest of them all. Who would think?
Easiest of them all there, Gautam. What should be on his agenda there, and what is on the agenda there?
I seriously consider just banging my head on the desk for my entire commentary. What should be on the agenda is making it very clear that the United States will not brook with any interference in the democratic systems of ourselves or our allies. This is not only in our national interest, it is in many ways our foremost national interest.
Okay, and so Vladimir Putin says, thank you very much, Mr. President. I didn't do any of those things, and I won't do it in the future.
And Trump has said, well, I have no choice but to believe him.
Donald Trump may be the only person in the world who believes what Vladimir Putin says, which it might possibly be because Donald Trump is the only person in the world who makes Vladimir Putin look like an honest person. But in general, we should not,
what should he do then? What should he do when Putin denies it again? Go ahead, you and then Carol.
We don't care about your denial. We know what you did. The evidence is overwhelming. Yeah. If there is any hint of anything like this happening in 2018, in the preparatory to it, we will set up a series of sanctions that are so massive that they will devastate the Russian economy. For example, the United States has within its capacity to deny Russia access to SWIFT check clearing and literally bring the Russian economy to a halt within a span of weeks. Right. We could do that. And we would if anyone else was president.
You seem to be worried about this meeting. What are you worried is going to come out of this meeting?
What I'm worried, let me answer two questions. Okay. First is, on the agenda should be, and it would be in both of our interests to have it talk about the extension of the START treaty, to talk about some kind of figuring out whether or not either side has actually violated the INF treaty. There are issues there on which we could, and it would be useful to have some discussion. What I am worried about is that he's going to say, as he said at the G7 meeting, they speak Russian in Crimea, therefore it's Russian, and trade off recognition of the Russian annexation of Crimea for some kind of deal that he keeps talking about where Russia is going to push Iran out of Syria. Russia has no leverage to push Iran out of Syria.
You don't believe that Donald Trump is going to put a stamp of approval on this Crimea thing, do you?
He said he might. He said, we'll see.
What do you worry about quickly? 30 seconds.
So I worry more about what's happening in NATO just because the collapse of the NATO alliance would be so devastating for the world that we don't even want to think about what that world would look like.
You may start banging your head right now. Thank you very much, Carol. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
Gautam, it's great to see you, too. Thanks for your time.